What it do, what it do, what it do. It is your boy, Andrew Schultz, aka Mr. Goody Two Shoes. And who am I with as always? Joseph Huggins, aka Old Man Huggie. Talk shit or get off the pod. And today is a special interview episode. Today we have Mr. Ken W. Good from the Board of Directors of the Professional Bondsman of Texas here to discuss cash bail versus no cash bail, the intricacies of both, the pros, the cons. Mr. Ken Good, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me at 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah. Sorry about that, but it's only 6 o'clock for me out here in California.
Oh yeah, so it's your fault.
Yeah, it's always his fault that we get started late, but it's good.
But yeah, no, it's fantastic. We were just talking about cash bail in terms of attacks maybe on the Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris as her when she was district attorney and attorney general of California, and so it's good to like follow up on this and get an expert on here. So first, Ken, I would like to just ask you. Can you just tell us like just a bit about your role on the board of professional bondsmen and how your experience has kind of shaped your views in this realm?
Sure, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law for, I hate to even say, over 30 years, probably closer to 35 by now. So let's don't do the math. I'm married, have two children, and I have specialized in bail law for probably 20 years. What has kind of shaped my opinion on bail reform is I was asked by a friend to go to a hearing in a case called O'Donnell versus Harris County, which was one of the first cases. And I went to the hearing, and the judge, in my opinion, was not applying the law correctly. She was wrong on some of her rulings. She was applying some standards that I felt like didn't apply. And so I came out of the hearings that, calling friends and setting off alarms and saying we need to become experts on these issues, because if we're not telling our story, it doesn't look like anybody will be telling our story. And so I set about to become very knowledgeable in this. I have a background in appellate stuff, so the legal issues is kind of my area. And I think I've been proven right over time. The judge in that specific case was overruled probably 6 or 7 or more times by the appellate courts. And ultimately, even though she was ruling the opposite, they ultimately said that case should have never been filed in federal court. And even though they're still following that case in Harris County, it was ultimately overturned. But they're still following. So it's just an example of where politics has overcome public safety issues over what's best for this society or community. We're just, making political issues, political decisions.
Right, I see. Yeah, and for the audience, you've argued cases in front of the Texas Supreme Court, the Fifth Circuit, Appellate Court for the federal system, right?
Yes, and I've also, Texas has 2 high courts: the Texas Supreme Court for civil cases, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals for criminal cases, and that court also governs bail issues. And I've argued 2 cases before the Court of Criminal Appeals on bail issues and won both of them. So just been very fortunate.
Nice. I just wanted to give you your bona fides here. So for our listeners, because we do have like a large international audience, I don't know if we let you know, but it's about 50 different countries that listen to this. But could you maybe explain what the cash bail system is and how it currently operates in the United States?
Well, I think the bail system came with us from England, and we would actually refer to it as, common law. And, our common law system is really not a type of law that's written down. It's based upon history. And so it's something that our early settlers brought with them. And, for the earliest, the way we applied bail, if you were a bondsman or you were the person that was the surety for someone, if they didn't show up for court, you took their place. And we had it that way for a very short period of time, and then it became a financial guarantee. So when they set a bail amount, the surety is guaranteeing that amount will be paid to the court if the defendant does not appear for court. This bail reform movement that we've had, Started out by attacking the private industry by saying that system was going to be declared unconstitutional, so we needed to come up with a new system. The problem is we've had 2 federal courts rule that it's constitutional. And so then the argument switches to be we just need to be fair. We need to be more fair. And so we need to come up with a new system. The problem is in the United States, there's not an alternative that's as good as the private industry. And so states that have tried something else have, fallen into chaos because there is not a system that has been used in the United States that is an alternative to the private industry that has the same low failure to appear rate and the same high level of accountability. In fact, on the News Nation town hall, there was a mayor that was a former judge who said, she made that same point. She said, until there's an alternative that has the same low level of failure to appear and the same high accountability rate as the private industry, then you don't have an alternative. And that's what we're finding in these alternatives that have been attempted.
Could you explain what some of those alternatives are, even though they might not produce the same results, but what are the other ideas out there?
Well, okay, so it's going to depend on what state you're in and on what it's called. So I just call them simple release mechanisms. So like in California, it would be called release on zero bail. In New York, it would be called release on no bail. And then in Texas, it would be called release on personal bond. All 3 of those are simple release mechanisms where you're being released on your promise to come back. And so we would call it a bond without surety. Released on zero bond, you're promising to appear with no penalty if you don't. And in New York, you're released on no bond, so there's no promise of a forfeiture to the state if you don't appear. It's just your personal promise. And we're finding that when we take away the private industry or we make it a simple release, which is just your promise, then people, we were told, oh, everybody wants to go back to court and get their case resolved. We're finding that's not true. Like in Harris County and California, they use simple release for misdemeanors. They have an 80% failure to appear rate. They have it across the state in California and in Harris County, which is Houston, they have an 80% failure to appear rate. Well, that's creates chaos in criminal cases because your case can't go forward when you don't show up. It has to be put on hold until you come back. And so in California, that's great because they have a time limit. They have a speedy trial statute. So if you don't come back, the state has a time limit on when they have to get the case resolved. And if they don't, then they dismiss it. So that creates chaos, puts high pressure on dismissal. Dismissal is de facto decriminalization. And then what do criminals see that? See that as a green light. They can commit more crime.
Well, so what would you say to people that would say, well, so you're saying that if they could had the money, that it would be okay for them to be released from jail, but otherwise, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, so what? Yeah,
I mean, that's a big attack on that system is that it
inequality.
It's unequal or it disproportionately.
Well, see, that is the newest attack. It's just not fair.
Class. Yeah.
It's just not a fair system. But here's the problem I have with that is, the criminal justice system was never intended to treat everybody exactly the same. When I get arrested for the first time, the criminal justice system was developed so that the system applies only the amount of pressure that needs to be applied to me as a first-time offender to get me to turn and become a good citizen. Second time I'm arrested, well, okay, the pressure they put on me the first time wasn't enough, and so now we would need to put a little bit more, and so on until you're a career criminal, and career criminals usually go to prison. So the concept that, well, we need to treat everybody the same, we need to be fair, that's not the way the criminal justice system was written. And here's the problem I have. We have this, like in California, New York, we have a charge-based release mechanism. So when you get arrested for theft, we're going to treat everybody that's been accused of theft for the same way. We're just going to release them zero bond. We're going to release them on no bail. Well, you're going to be treated the same whether it's your first offense or whether your 20th offense, which is part of the problem. And that's not the way the criminal justice system was built. The criminal justice system was, if you are a career criminal, or if you have a long criminal history, your bail should be set higher because you're a bigger risk. And what the point you were making about the ability to pay, I agree with that probably on first time offenders. But if you have a criminal history, then I don't agree with that, because then your bail is not set based solely on your ability to pay. It's also based on your criminal history, your risk to public safety. And if you can't afford the bond that's been set and you have a criminal history, you're not in jail because you can't afford to pay. You're in jail because of your criminal history. That's the part that we're seeing California and New York and some other areas like Harris County where they have gone astray. They're just taking all accountability out, and criminals are seeing that as a green light to commit more crime.
Well, so there's been a couple like bail reform acts passed by Congress, one in the 60s, one in the 80s. The
Yeah.
60s, it was kind of based on like getting people, how can we get people out of jail, like lean on the side of releasing. And then in the 80s, with like crime going up and stuff, like people didn't really like, so the reform was more, how do we make it harder for people to get released on bail. And so what I read was that after that reform in the 80s, basically how it's been put into practice, not, it wasn't like how the reform was supposed to like perform, because like somebody's like, if you were going to get set like a high bail amount, you have a chance to like have a hearing, bring in witnesses, provided with counsel. But instead, or if they were going to restrict your bail, that's what, like, not let you release, that you have a chance to appeal it. But instead, what's happening is that they're giving them bail, but they're setting the amount so high that it like ipso facto that they're going to remain in jail, because like nobody could afford that amount.
Well, okay, so bail is run by the states. For each state has its own system of bail, and the federal government also has a system of bail. What you're talking about is the federal government. And, it's really difficult to compare what the states are doing to the federal government because, when the last reforms were done in the federal government, they were holding pretrial about 24% of people who were arrested. And they did reforms to try to make it lower. But since then, over time, we are now, if you're arrested by the federal government on a criminal case, you've got a 75% chance they're going to hold you pretrial because they have a lot of presumptions that either you're going to run or you're a risk to public safety. So, like drug charges, you're going to have a presumption that you're going to be held. We've had arguments before. Why don't we have the federal government system for bail, like in Texas or California or New York? I mean, we don't have the infrastructure. We can't we can't hold 74% of people that are arrested. I mean, we get complaints when it's 25, when it's 30. Look at what's going on in California. Everything they're doing is to reduce their prison population because it's been capped for years now. And so when you look at Prop 47, you look at these other propositions in the past, you take a step back, ignore what they're entitling it about making it safer. Everything they're doing in California is to reduce the prison population because it's capped and they're still full and they have no capacity and they can't, to put additional people in jail because of a lack to hold them accountable. So I think my point would be, we can't follow the federal system and the state systems. Each one's run by themselves, and what politics is kind of taking over bail reform, criminal justice reform, and it's one side of the spectrum wants to go one way, the other side goes the other. And I would agree with you. We've been through this in the 60s where we felt safer, we released more people from prison, we started having crime go up, and so we had a disagreement on how to address it. We had one side of the spectrum saying we won't help, and so we ended up with a backlash. We ended up with Ronald Reagan and the war on crime. We're committing the same. We're going through the same cycle now. We're in the middle of that cycle. It's probably swung harder to the left this time, which I'm worried about because it'll make it swing harder to the right when it eventually swings, and it will, because what we're doing right now is not sustainable. And you're seeing it in California. They've put a proposition on the ballot in November to repeal Prop 47.
So, I was reading that between the year 1970 and 2011, the amount of uh, pretrial jail population has increased 433%, and that's a lot due to based on cash bail. And uh, the other stat to go along with that is that 80% of people who go through the criminal system are legally indignant, meaning like they don't have the money to afford the necessities of life. So if 80% of the people going through the criminal system can't even afford the necessities of life, then how are they going to be able to afford, a cash bail, like even small amounts, like $300?
That's the same mentality they're using in California to say we need to address homelessness by building housing, and that's been an utter fiasco. I mean, you just saw the governor change policy in the last 2 weeks saying please remove homeless people. And I would think I think that it has more to do with the upcoming election in 4 months than anything, especially since the current candidate for president from the Democrat side is from the state of California. So I think that that's a mistake when you look at issues like that. I mean, I disagree that 400% increase was the result of the private industry, because the private industry doesn't make money with people staying in jail. We do a service to the taxpayers, and we do it at no cost. And so, and leaving people in jail doesn't make any money for anybody. Now, I will say that if someone is in jail and they have a criminal history and can't set the bail that's been set, it's not because they can't afford it. It's because they have a criminal history. And we're seeing the trade-off. Okay, so we're not holding anybody. We're just doing release on zero bond. And what's the impact right now in California on public safety? I mean, you've got shoplifting run amok. You've got stores that can't withstand $25,000 a day and shoplifting closing. You've got San Francisco buildings, commercial buildings, that are selling for 30% of their value 2 years ago, 50% of their value 3 years ago. And what we're not looking at is that cost to society. And we're saying, well, look at all this money we're saving by not housing them in jail. Look at the cost to our public safety community. Look at our society. It's not sustainable. And you're going to see Prop 47 get repealed in November, and you'll probably see the DA Gascon of LA probably lose his reelection bid. It's going to be ugly, but he only got 25% of the vote in the primary, and he made it to the ballot for the general election. But I mean, usually incumbents that only get 25% don't win reelection.
Well, are you saying that first of all, in the country, violent crime's at a 50-year low right now. In California, like there are issues with homelessness. San Francisco is definitely kind of accessible, but are you saying that that's because of no cash bail?
I'm saying that's part of it. Yes, absolutely part of it. When the Nancy Pelosi Federal Building, which is in San Francisco, when the federal government tells their employees work from home because it's not safe for you to park your car and walk from your car to the building and have your car parked in the parking garage. Yeah, I think that's because of rising crime. And I think rising crime is a result of Prop 47, no cash bail, and things like that. But when you can't hold anybody accountable, when criminals see that their case will be dismissed, there's a higher likelihood of that than getting found guilty or getting prison time. Absolutely, they see that as a green light to commit more crime.
No, okay, I agree with that. Like, so part of what you were saying, like, how Governor Newsom he ordered for homeless encampments to be broken up, and then at the same time he also asked the sheriff's department in Oakland like they had a practice of not pursuing people on foot. So if they ran from like a crime scene, like the cops wouldn't they just wouldn't go after them. And he said to stop doing that. I believe that like part of what's going on in San Francisco is it's that they're not charging people with certain crimes. It's not that they're charging them and then letting them go with no cash bail.
I think that's part of it. I do think that the $950 or theft below $950. I mean, you know, you probably remember Prop 47 didn't say we're going to change certain felonies to no crimes. We're changing certain felonies to misdemeanors, so it'll make it easier for them to get jobs. And then, but they'll still have to answer for their misdemeanor crimes. And then DAs in certain urban areas then just unilaterally said we're no longer going to prosecute those crimes. So I think the failure to prosecute crimes is a big problem, and that's bigger than just Prop 47. Look at the protests that we had at the end of the semester, where a bunch of people were arrested, but as time's gone by, more and more of those charges have been just dismissed by DAs who've decided not to prosecute. Not because they didn't think there was a crime, they just decided not to prosecute. Maybe more so in New York than California, but you can see it in both places. And I don't agree that violent crime has gone down. I think we've politicized the whole reporting of crime. I mean, if you analyze the FBI statistics, they say we went to these cities and we got their statistics. The problem is, I know for a fact that you look at a couple of those cities, you go there, they say crime is up, but for some reason the FBI says crime is down. We've politicized crime so much now. We're playing games with the numbers, and the reason why I know that's for sure is for two reasons. Number one, the NAACP in Oakland has demanded a state of emergency on crime, saying we cannot continue what we're doing, and the DA, who's currently under a removal or recall petition, said, "Oh, you're just repeating Republican talking points," and the regional NAACP came back out and said, "No, we agree with the local group. It's crime is running amok in your area, and it needs to be addressed." So I think in these urban areas where we have DAs who have decided to favor the accused criminal over the accused victim, and so there's no voice for the victim in the courtroom anymore because both the DA and the defendant are speaking for the defendant. I mean, that's turned criminal justice upside down. And I forgot what the other point I was going to make was.
That's cool. But the justice system in America is based on a presumption of innocence, and so that's the reason for even offering bail in the first place. It's like
No, that's not true, because presumption of innocence doesn't apply at bail setting hearing. It only applies at trial. The purpose of bail is to give assurance to the court that you will return to respond to the criminal charges that have been that have been charged against you. The only purpose of bail is what assurance we give the court that you'll return.
No, I understand that. Sorry, I meant just releasing people pre-trial. That's the purpose. Is the presumption of innocence. It's the reason why we're letting you out of jail until your trial on
bail. The
bail.
presumption doesn't apply there. You're giving the court assurance that you're going to return.
Right. So cash bail, no bail. My point is the releasing after you've been charged is because you're not actually convicted yet. So they don't. So we're leaning towards not holding somebody in jail because they're not actually convicted. And
I guess
whether we do it with no cash or whether we do it with the
well, I understand what you're saying, but
that's all I was saying.
I understand what you're saying, but that's not the purpose. I mean,
the purpose of the cash bail is to then give you an incentive to come back.
No. That's the purpose of bail, whether it's cash or anything. Yeah. The problem is, like in California, they've changed it where there's no assurance being given. The argument is made, well, you don't need assurance because everybody wants to return. Everybody wants to resolve their criminal case. But that's not true. If we have an 80% failure to appear rate in misdemeanors in California, which is what Yolo County DA says, they're not giving. I mean, they're laughing at the state of California for releasing them on zero bail because they're not showing up.
I mean, what's the threshold? Like, what should the threshold be legally where somebody should qualify? Let's say that you have, because I think in Texas, if there's an assault, I think we did a reform in 2001 where it doesn't forbid cash bail, but if they're charged with an assault charge or a violent offense, they have to put money down to be out pretrial. No questions asked. I mean, what would the threshold be for having cash bail or no cash bail? Like, is there some middle road where if it's...
Well, like right now in California, it's misdemeanor versus felony, and they're kind of bleeding over to the no cash bail for felonies too. Like LA County is doing no cash bail for probably most felonies. Here's where I fall on that. I'm not in favor of any charge-based release system. I want an individual review of each defendant and their criminal history. If you have a criminal history, then I want that criminal history reviewed. If you don't have a criminal history, it's your first time to be arrested, that's one problem. But if you've got a substantial criminal history, then I think you need cash bail. I don't care what your charges are, because you've got a problem. And just saying, hey, you're going to show up just by being released, I think we've got a long history showing that won't work. And the problem we have is, if you don't look at their criminal history, and see, that was the major reform Texas did, is they required judges 2 sessions ago to review criminal histories. They also made a long list of crimes that you're not entitled to simple release, and most of those are violent offenses. But they didn't do the reverse. They didn't require for other offenses that you be granted a personal bond. In fact, there was a bill filed for that, and it was rejected.
So, but with that argument, basically, if somebody's a billionaire, then they can have a criminal history and still get released regardless, because they have the money to afford the cash bail.
But I mean, look, the bail system gets criticized for, 3 years ago it was criticized for not working enough with people who are in jail. They're not giving them payment plans. So, and now today in Texas, you'll see them being criticized for working too much with people in jail. I mean, if you've got a $1,000 bond, you're going to pay $100, and if you can get a payment plan, you can get a payment plan for that. So depending on the bondsman, I mean, if you've got a $1,000 bond, you have to pay $100 with a payment plan. There's nobody in jail that can't do that, in my opinion.
I mean, I don't know about if that's true or not.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, but so like a personal experience, like, so I got arrested at 19 for driving on no insurance, suspended license, had a warrant for camping, illegal camping ticket. This was in Denton County. Got scooped up, got arrested, sat in Denton County or Denton City Jail for about 4 or 5 days. Transferred to county. I think to get out it was like $600, and I couldn't afford it. Working paycheck to paycheck, just paid my rent, and then I ended up having some people get me out, but I had to sell my car to pay off stuff, go to court, defer adjudication, all that, check in, and had to pay everything off. And it was extremely difficult. That was like, I had no previous drug offenses, theft, nothing. That's the only time I've ever been arrested. And it really...
but you had an existing warrant. So you had received a ticket, you didn't show up, so you had a failure to appear and issued a warrant. So at the time you were arrested, you already had a history of failing to appear.
Okay.
And so that was the reason why. Now, the other problem you had is you went to city jail for 4 days, and then you went to the county jail.
Yeah, it was like...
That's what's been changed in Texas. You would be amazed at how quickly you would be moved. That 4 days would probably be down to 2. It's still going to cause disruption. I mean, the disruption is because you didn't take care of your
my illegal
your
camping
thing
ticket.
when you first got it. Look, hey, I've been there too. I'll be honest with you. I had a failure to register my car during COVID, and with all this bail reform, I'm like, they're not going to arrest me for that. And so I got my second ticket for failing to register my car. And then I'm like, well, I'll just take the sticker that says it's expired off my car, and I'll just drive around with no registration sticker. I got my third ticket for not having my car registered. And, by then, the law's made for people who will follow the law. I mean, to unravel all that just because I was mad about bail reform and how it ties the hands of judges and law enforcement. I mean, to get my driver's license renewed, my driver's license had been suspended at some point then. I didn't even know that because I had these 3 tickets that I never took care of. And so I ended up having to go, and I felt so bad when I finally unraveled this, and the amount of money that I had to spend to unravel it. I'm standing in line to pay my ticket, and there's some, guy like you when he was young who couldn't afford to pay his ticket, and they were giving him a payment plan. And so when I got up there, I was like, look, can I just pay his ticket too? And they're like, do you know him? I'm like, no, I just have a lot of bad karma because of me just being on a soapbox. And so I'm trying to get some good karma. So I want to pay my stuff, and I want to pay his too. And they allowed me to do that. So
let me ask you, so you were saying that a lot is not discussed how the effects on society by having no cash bail, like what was happening in San Francisco, we were talking about. So, like on any given day, the average amount of people arrested in the United States is about 635,000, and 80% of those people are waiting pretrial or in pretrial detention. Uh, they're not able to go to work that next day. Like they're not able to take care of their kids. What would you say, like that the effect that somebody getting arrested for petty crime can't afford the $300 to get out, loses their job, might lose their kids because they're in jail. What if like the effects that that has on society versus the effects of letting those people out? Do you think there's any like argument there that that might over, you know?
Okay, so here's the problem. That's just common sense. The longer you're in jail, the more it's going to hurt you. I mean, when
Right.
people say, "Oh, we've got studies that say," look, it's common sense, but that argument also applies to hardcore criminals too. The longer they're in jail, the more it's going to hurt their family. So, I have a hard time with that argument, but I'm sympathetic to it. But the problem is, we're setting up systems where if we want to review criminal histories, if we want to see if who the really bad people are, we're making it impossible to do. Look at California; we're just releasing everybody on zero bail. So what if we want to change that, where we have to review? Well, they don't have a system in place where they can do it, so it's going to cause further chaos, more problems, and so we're setting up a system for failure. And I don't know really what the answer to that is. What I would say though is, if you want people to be held accountable, what we're currently doing is not working, and it's making it worse, and so we have to change to something else. In fact, I would say the current system that they're using in California is worse than what they were using before that, and it's just making it worse. And so, what's going to happen if Prop 47 is repealed? You've got these DAs in these um, municipal or urban areas saying we're not prosecuting crime under $950 when it's a misdemeanor. They can still say that when it's a felony if they want. I think Gascon will be defeated, so we'll see if he's there to make that. But there's a lot of work to do. I mean, the bail industry, all we do is get people to go to court. If you're going to set up a system that doesn't care whether people go to court, then you don't need the bail system. If it's all a pretext on misdemeanors to require them to show, if they don't, in certain time period passes, we dismiss their case, why are we prosecuting misdemeanors at all?
Yeah, so you're saying that it's not that you wouldn't be for and not necessarily a cash for bail system, but it's the fact that certain states, California, other other states or municipalities that are being like handled by attorney generals or district attorneys, the fact that they're just letting it be an open revolving door is the problem. That's not that there could be a better system, but A, there isn't one, but also that the no system at all isn't, and that's basically what they're doing is what you're saying.
I do think that's making it a big problem, but I think the system they're setting up is built on we don't care whether they come to court. If you care whether people come to court, you want them as much as possible to have the private industry, because that's the one thing the bonding industry does. We get people to court. That's what it does well. Compare the failure to appear rate, less than 10% for the private industry. If you look in Harris County, you look in the sheriffs, they're saying it's at least 75% for a simple release in misdemeanor courts. There's a Harris County Court Watch saying it's at least 80%. Yolo County DA says it's across the state. In Harris and in California for misdemeanors, an 80% failure to appear rate. I mean, an 80% failure to appear rate, 80% of the cases are being put on hold until they come back. I mean, that's a recipe for disaster. The only way you can keep the criminal justice system from collapsing is to dismiss cases. You dismiss cases, you're sending the message to criminals that they can commit more crime, and that's exactly what you're seeing in California.
But is there an actual like peer-reviewed study that says if you have these people, the 80% that are failure to appear, if you made them put up, or if they were able to put up the $400, that come back?
Well, there are studies that are coming out now because of that. Yolo County kept all of its data during COVID, and they released that as a study and found that the recidivism rate was a lot higher for people released on zero bail than it was a lot higher for people released on zero bail. They were criticized because there was no comparisons. So they did an update to their study, and they compared it to people who were released on zero bail, and on surety bonds, and found for nonviolent offenders released on zero bail, they had a 200% greater chance of committing a violent offense in the next 18 months compared to somebody released on zero bail. I mean, that's a substantial number. We also have similar statistics from New York for people released on no bail and the impact on recidivism. The problem we're having is that the people supporting these changes are playing fast and loose with the numbers, and they disagree that the recidivism rate is increasing. But it's like an inter-party fight in Houston and Harris County. We've got a sitting Democrat DA saying recidivism is increasing because of these bail reform that y'all have enacted, and you've got the people defending the system saying no, that's not. And the really cool thing is the guy from New York, who's a former DA, he said, I mean, I did a podcast with him, and he explains the numbers. He gets into the numbers because they do the same thing in New York. The way that they're playing with the numbers to show recidivism is not going up, and the way they're doing it in Houston are the same, and they're just playing games with the numbers. And the way law enforcement looks at recidivism, bail reform, bad bail reform has dramatically impacted recidivism, which means it's caused people to commit more crimes. And if you think about it, that's a disservice to the people committing crime. Just on the type of release, I mean, we could change them and decrease the amount of crime that they're doing. We're putting them in a worse position just because of the way we release them, and then because we're not holding them accountable, we're dismissing their cases, we're telling them they can commit more crime, and as a result, today's misdemeanors are the training grounds for tomorrow's felonies.
Well, you're saying that there's an 80% failure to appear rate. Well, with cash bail system, there's an 80% where they can't afford to pay the cash bail, so they're not failing to appear because they never left jail in the first place.
Okay, the private industry doesn't make money if 80% of the people that they were going to get out of jail stay in jail. I don't agree with that number.
I understand the private industry isn't, but that the bails are the cash bails being set so high that knowing that they can't afford it, so that they will stay in jail.
Okay, so I think there's a very small portion of people that may happen for. I think maybe even more in Los Angeles, because I am aware that there's this push and pull between the courts and the sheriff on what their bail schedule should be when they had a bail schedule. But that argument that you're making was made in, I think, the O'Donnell case, O'Donnell versus Harris County, that setting bail at a point where they can't afford it is in effect de facto detention, and that's unconstitutional. That argument was rejected. I mean, especially if you have a criminal history. If you have a criminal history, then the fact that you can't afford the bail that's been set, it's not because you're poor, it's because you have a criminal history, and the court has elected not to reduce your bond because you are a danger to public safety. If
why release them anyways if they're a danger to public safety? In that case, if you have a criminal history, like, why are we even setting bail at that point? That's what I want to know. It's like we're cool with it if you can afford the $100,000, but we're not but we really don't want to release you. You know what I'm saying? It's like, why in those cases with the criminal history where they're a danger to society do we not just revoke bail?
Well, I think the court. Okay, so once you're released, if you don't appear for court, we need more courts revoking bail instead of just when they come back releasing them on the same bond they're on, or releasing them again for no bail. I mean, that's the problem with no accountability. The other point that you're making, I think you have. I don't think you have an understanding of the people that go through the process. First time offender, when they're arrested, I mean, they're probably not going to be held, but they have the most friends and family that are going to stand up for them. As they continue to get arrested over and over, the first people that are going to abandon them are their friends, and their family's going to stick with them. Usually the family's the ones that will stick with them the longest. And when they're getting bonded out for $100,000, the private industry is requiring family members or friends to stand up and say, hey, this is a good guy. And, we're damaging these people because, you don't know the strength of your brother coming in and saying, Andrew, I know you screwed up, and I know you have a history of screwing up, but I still think you can beat this. And Andrew, I love you, and You have value. But there's a point in time when you can screw your family so many times that they won't stand up for you anymore. And that's when you're a career criminal. And when your bond gets set high at that point, because you've got a substantial criminal history, nobody's going to stand up with you. Nobody's going to tell the bondsman that they'll be there for you. You don't have anyone that can post that bond. And that doesn't come, you don't have a right to be released at that point. They can set your bond at whatever amount. If you can't afford it, that's where you need to be. You're a
Right,
career
but
criminal.
why set the bond at all if they shouldn't be released? Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, because in Texas, and I think California is that way. I'm not sure if they still are, but I think they used to be. Like in Texas, our state constitution says everyone has a right to release with sufficient sureties, unless you're charged with specific crimes like capital murder. So those are the only times the judge can say, I deny your bail. Other than that, the court is usually required to set bail, and the way they do it is they set it based upon all these factors. Texas, one of them is your criminal history. Now, after that, though, if Joseph fails to appear for court, or Joseph is out on bond, Joe's out on bond and he commits a new crime, the judge of the first court has the ability to say, okay, you violated the conditions of my bond, and I'm revoking your bond and I'm putting you in jail. That's the accountability that we're lacking right now in these simple release states, because it's a charge-based release. So we don't care in those systems whether you're currently on bond, because we're just going to release you on a new one, because we're not holding anybody accountable. We're setting up a system of creating chaos so we can't hold anybody accountable. And that's the problem. And I would point to, we have a case study that proved this, because there's a case called Sanchez versus Alabama, where a county had to live under these mandatory release mechanisms for 4 years, both felony and misdemeanor. Crime started going up because criminals realized that under this preliminary injunction they couldn't hold anybody, and they won on appeal 4 years later. And so they could reinstitute a system of accountability. If you didn't show up for court, you were going to go back to jail. And I did a podcast with the sheriff, and the sheriff said it took about 6 months and crime started going down. And we can fix these states where we're having this great chaos, where crime is running amok. We can fix all that. And Sanchez versus Alabama has shown us the model. It's just politics is keeping us from doing what needs to be done. We know how to fight crime, but politics is preventing it in California and New York right now.
Well, judges have a lot of discretion, so what's preventing a judge from circumventing the Texas Constitution and setting bail so high that it becomes essentially that you're detaining them and not releasing them, like knowingly? Like, so it's like they know.
Well, we've already had a court rule that that's not a de facto preventative detention. You can file a motion at any time to lower your bond. So the courts have ruled that that's not what they're doing. And the problem we have in states like California and New York, where actually the legislatures are actually tying the hands of the judges. And that's what they're doing when I say charge-based release. So they're saying, judge, if they're charged with this, no matter how many times, they have to be released on zero bail. So the judges don't have the discretion to hold them. And same thing in New York. They have to release them on no bond. That's the problem. That's what Texas has taken the opposite approach and strengthened accountability and require judges to do things like they can't grant a simple release for certain charges. And if you are out on bail and you get charged with a new offense, then they have specific sanctions that are set out by statute. So they're going the opposite direction of California and New York.
What about how the correctional system, it somebody could be in there for petty crime or whatever, and then now they're around hardened criminals, and then they end up like just getting more involved into that like type of society just because they couldn't afford the cash bail. So that you're kind of corrupting these people by leaving them in jail longer than if you just got them out of there and they were just dealing with I stole a bicycle.
Well, cash bail is only a pretrial release mechanism, so it
Right.
doesn't
But some
apply
people get
post
stuck there for
conviction.
3 years in Rikers Island because that there's the
There's
speedy
nobody
trials.
in Rikers Island right now for petty theft. They don't have room. They're full of hardened criminals right now.
Well, there was.
Well, there's not now after bail reform, because you think about it, they're releasing all misdemeanors, so there's not any petty theft or bicycle theft that's probably being prosecuted. But if they are, they're getting released on zero bail or no bond. I mean, their Rikers Island is full right now of very bad people, just like almost all jails right now after COVID, because during COVID we only kept the really bad people, and as we've gone forward, we now have a backlog of 4 years of cases. Only the really bad cases are going forward, and those are the people that are in jail full. I mean, Harris County has an 80% failure to appear rate on misdemeanors, and their their jail's full. They're sending people to other counties to hold them for them, and they have no ability to hold anybody accountable because their jail's already overcrowded.
Have you heard about the story of Khalif Browder?
I don't remember if I have or not.
Khalif Browder. They did a Netflix documentary, but it's when he was a 16-year-old. He spent 3 years at Rikers Island awaiting trial, 2 years in solitary confinement, and he was arrested for allegedly stealing a backpack. The case was never prosecuted. The charges were dropped, but Browder committed suicide after his release, but because of what happened to him while he was in Rikers for 3 years.
What was
And
his name?
Khalif Browder, Kalief, and then Browder, Browder.
Okay.
And this is actually before it was a documentary, I had heard this story uh, from an author, or maybe it was a journalist on NPR. And yeah, it was like super sad. He was,
Yeah, but this is from, I mean, he died in 2015. So this
right. That
predates COVID. So this predates everything we're talking about is
okay.
the
Well, that
stresses on the system. But this, I mean, he committed suicide in 2015. So his stuff all took place before that.
but so there's no states like now where people are being held for that long pre-trial.
I don't believe so. I think, in fact, cases like that are being used as some of the reasons why we need to make change. But
Right.
the changes that have been pushed have been to tie the hands of judges so they can't do anything about career criminals, gang members, or organized crime. If you tie the hands of the judges so if they only commit petty crimes, you can't do anything to them, then those groups step right in and they learn how to make millions of dollars. Look at the catalytic converter theft. That's a perfect example of where organized crime has stepped in and figured out ways to make thousands of dollars.
Okay, and then but would you say that you have a bias in this because you're a bail bondsman and representing the bail bondsman? Like how can you just for the audience so that like yes, you do have an incentive here, but you're coming from a neutral place. Like
Well, I mean, okay, so I'm an attorney, I represent bondsmen, but I'm not going to say you can't say I don't have a bias, but I have looked at these different release mechanisms. And I've looked at the strengths and the weaknesses of them. And I will say that what I've discovered is if we're not making these arguments about the benefits of the private industry, nobody's making them. I mean, nobody is pointing to them at all. And you could look at Illinois, and they got rid of their bail industry years
statewide.
ago,
Yeah.
and crime was already going up, and so they doubled down on what they're calling. They ended cash bail. They were just getting rid of cash bonds, where you had to post the amount of the bond in cash, and the courts were operating on that. When they failed to appear, they were operating on those funds as part of their operating budget, and so now they haven't replaced that. So chaos even more. But here's the point I make. I'm going to quote the judge from the News Nation town hall. She's not biased. She's just a former judge. Until you have an alternative to the private industry that has the same low failure to appear rate, same high level of accountability, you don't have an alternative. If you're trying something else that has a 50% failure to appear rate compared to less than 10%, or if you're trying something else that has an 80% failure to appear rate, then there's no comparison. You're using something that creates chaos forces de facto decriminalization, and the private industry doesn't do that. And I don't think that's a bias to say that we should not be trying systems that don't work.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give you the opportunity to,
Well, and so I'm curious. So you would say that Texas would be the closest thing to a system that would be working, or something that where the success rate's high. It's not perfect, but it's closer to what we would want it to be. Like, how much farther do you think we have to go?
well, not in Harris County.
Well, not in Harris County, but I mean that's yeah. But
Well, but I would say that, I mean, I think the Browder case shows an example of where we need to always look to improve the system. I mean, the failure of the Browder case was the failure of the system monitoring who was in the jail. I mean, he had a case that was assigned to a court, and that court never said who's in jail that's before my court and who's been there for 3 years, and that we need to bring them before me and find out what's going on. So we had, and since 2015, probably one of the best things we have is, software to monitor that type of stuff. And so that's an example of, we're always looking to improve the criminal justice system. And we're still today, I mean, anything that's good for the criminal justice system is usually good for the bail system, because in Texas they're so closely intertwined. But I don't know if I think that there needed to be changes to the bail system to begin with, because the changes that have been made in Texas have really been to strengthen it, not to weaken it. I think these changes that have been made, where we're tying the hands of judges so they can't have discretion on charge-based release, is very bad for the system, and we need to get rid of them. And it's where politics has overcome what's best for the criminal justice system. And what we're missing in all this is the very people they say they're trying to help is the people that are getting hurt the worst. Because when crime is being committed by our black and brown communities, they're all usually being committed on our black and brown communities. So when crime goes up, it's going to go up faster in those communities. So when we say we're doing these things to help them, we're actually hurting those groups even more if it's wrong, if it's not working, which is what I'm arguing.
Let me ask you another question. How does the private prison industry and the bail bondsman commission interact? Like their incentives, are they like counter to each other? Because I would assume the private prison industry gets paid more prisoners they have in jail, and whereas bondsman, you were saying nobody gets paid as a bondsman with people in jail. So just wanted to find out what overlaps there.
The private bail industry, there's no overlap. There's no overlap at all with the private prison system. In fact, I don't know anything about the private prison system. We've closed a lot of prisons in Texas, especially I think COVID brought the population down, and that's one of the reasons why we have issues right now. The prison population's down because we haven't been trying cases, so all these people are stuck in the county system, and we need their cases resolved so that they can be moved to the state prison population, and I think a lot of our capacity issues deal with that. But there's no overlap. They have nothing to do with each other, and I don't know anything about the private prison system. I would say it does get a bad rap, and I think private industry can always do anything that the government does better. And I think that's one example, but I don't know that for sure, because I haven't looked or spent any time looking at the private prison system.
Right. I'm just thinking of the for-profit incentives when it comes around to incarceration and the justice system.
Well, the for-profit incentives from the bail system only benefits the criminal justice system, because when someone doesn't appear for court, the incentive that's given to the industry is, if the quicker you get them back to the criminal justice system, you get a benefit from that. You owe less money to the county. And so we, working with families, working with defendants. I mean, probably the best part about the private industry is we built a relationship either with the family or the defendant. So when he screws up and miss court, he will trust what he's being told by the private industry on what will happen to him if he returns. Now, a lot of times they don't. They get scared and they run, and so we have to go find them. But I mean, the quicker the criminal case gets back on track, the quicker the victims get justice, the quicker the case can get resolved. We do have time limits in California on misdemeanor cases. If those time limits are not met, the case will be dismissed. And so you've got, I mean, anything that works quicker, there's no system that works quicker than the private industry. And, we need to be leaning more on it, not less.
I mean, I have actually no like issues that I could think of with the private industry. I mean, it seems like it needs to exist if cash bail is going to exist. It's more whether is cash bail the most effective way, and are there not like repercussions that outweigh its effect? Is what I guess the purpose of the interview, trying to explore that was. I really appreciate you coming on. Just do you have any
Yeah, no,
questions?
I really appreciate the insight. It's definitely a different look at it. I am like, Texas is one direction, so you said they added more to strengthen it. Others have taken away from it. I mean, what's this? What's it going to take for, say, because I think it's New Mexico, New Jersey, Kentucky, New York, and California, Illinois have all dramatically reduced or adjusted their systems. I mean, what's the limit? Where do you see this going in a negative to where they just have to stop, or are we past that point?
I think, well, New York has already rolled back their bail reform 3 or 4 times, and they will end up rolling it back again. Last time the governor said that was it. They weren't going to do more, but crimes continue to increase. I think as crime increases, you'll see rollbacks of criminal justice reform, and you'll see rollbacks of bail reform. And that will continue until crime starts going down.
Yeah.
I mean, New York's not the only state that's rolled back. Alaska's rolled back. Other states have rolled back. They tried it; it didn't work, so they rolled it back. Uh, California had a petition drive to cancel a bill that the legislature passed, and it passed. So the rollback, I mean, the bail reform that the legislature passed was repealed by the petition drive, and now what LA County's doing is trying to just go around what the voters voted and do it anyway. I think there's going to be a big backlash at in the election in November, and I think that you're seeing the footprints of it or the little hints of it because the governor has ordered people to start emptying the homeless encampments. So he's trying to affect the voters 4 months before the election. You're going to see more movements, like was mentioned by Andrew. This don't chase people when they run. In that, you're going to see more because it's public safety. The public will demand safety, and if you can't, they're going to vote you out.
Yeah, I mean, also when it comes to that and don't chase, I mean, for a lot of these places, say, CVS is always a good example, or a Walgreens. I mean, it seems like it's reaching a point where it's been company policy not to chase, and the cops don't chase, so everybody's just letting them walk out, right? Like, I mean, the people that work there, if they're not going to be stopping them as well, or even pursuing any charges, and it's company policy to not do that. It's like double incentivization.
Now we're seeing like in New York and other states where they have these reforms, bad bail reform, they're also going after the Good Samaritans. So if you try to help somebody who's under attack, then you're going to have a higher likelihood of being indicted. And the reason for that is if we're telling the public to do nothing, just let them take whatever. We don't want anybody standing up because that's the start of vigilante justice. And so the reason why you saw in New York where the DA prosecuted somebody for that is because they don't want vigilante justice. That's what's next. If the government cannot provide public safety, society will demand it itself, whether it's vigilante or whatever.
I mean, do you think this is going to be a growing issue? Like, you keep bringing up the election and the politics. I mean, you see this becoming a growing issue? Like, this is going to become a bigger and bigger national topic on the bail reform issue or policies that have been in
because
place?
I think we're repeating the same cycle that we did in the 60s. And so we will complete the cycle again, which will have a backlash and we'll have a war on crime. And we'll have a president that's doing that. Right now, you see Trump pushing criminal issues, and you see Harris saying that crime is not a problem. It's just a Republican talking point. That's worked the last 3 elections combined with the abortion issue. And so it may work again. I don't think so, but I think I said that last election. But there will be a point in time where it won't work anymore. I'm hopeful that now's the time when you got the NAACP saying that crime's a problem. It becomes harder for the Democrats to deny it. But it appears that their strategy is once again to deny it, and I don't think you can deny it for right now. And so it will come back and bite somebody in the butt at some point, and I think it will be in November.
I mean, it might be just an easier case this time when it's a former prosecutor going up against a convicted felon. So it might be harder for the Republicans to make that criminal case.
Well, but in the last election, even though it didn't work nationally, the only reason why the Republicans are in control of the House is because crime was such an issue in New York that enough House members changed from Democrat to Republican that's the reason why the Republicans control the House, and that's all because of crime.
That is true.
That number is going to increase.
Like a local
that number
community.
will increase as a result of this election, not decrease. Now, the whole issue about Trump being a convicted felon and a prosecutor, I think that's a very interesting argument. I just would say there's no other Republican that could withstand the attack but Trump. I mean, Trump cannot be classified. I'm not even saying I like it, but when somebody sells T-shirts saying I'm voting for the convicted felon.
Oh, no,
you could make a case.
I'm not surprised by anything.
He's built different for sure, Donald Trump.
Well, but I think also, he just has the money. There's no Republican that could withstand the attack that he's had, whether you believe it's political or not. And he revels in it, and so I think that. It may be enough. It looks, the Biden strategy was just to get him convicted. You can't say that wasn't the strategy when they had their first debate within a week of him being convicted. They wanted to call him a convicted felon, have all the Republicans turn on him, and then it wouldn't matter whether Biden had cognitive issues. He was going to be the only alternative for re-election. But that didn't happen. It didn't work. My argument has been the conviction was so early, I think the voters will have forgotten about it by the time we get to the election. Just like when he was elected in 2016, they had the audio of him saying very inappropriate stuff, but they did it too early, and people.
It was 3 weeks before the election, but the same day the Russians released the emails from the DNC. So.
Well, but also that's something you usually release the Thursday before the election, not 3 weeks before the election. That's the Thursday night before the election's surprise, and they got scared because the momentum was moving against them, so they released it 3 weeks early, and it petered out. It petered out for whatever reason.
Yeah, that makes sense. He's kept throwing punches.
But ironically, it's what led him to provide the hush money to Stormy Daniels, because if that came out after that audio, that would have been terrible, and that's what got him the 34 criminal convictions. It all comes full circle. All right, we are done with the interview. I would like to thank Mr. Ken W. Good, Board of Directors, professional bondsman of Texas, a man who's argued in front of the Texas Supreme Court, the Fifth Circuit Appeals Court on bail reform issues. Been very generous with your time, and thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, really appreciate it, man. You were awesome. And you actually gave me some things to think about, too. Just like a different perspective, so I appreciate it. It's always good to have different people on who have differing opinions. And like I said, super informative, so thank you.
Well, thank you. That's the best compliment I can get. If we have to stop and think, then that's all I can ask for.
Are you plugging your books or not now?
Well, no, I don't need to plug anything. I've got plenty of stuff to plug. Just go to pbtx.com if you want more information, or you could go to our podcast, The Bail Post, which you go to bailpost.com and see more episodes about bail reform.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Recording stopped.
Okay, guys, y'all get me working.